Moment. Hi.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the ones who have already joined. We would like to ask the participants to please keep the cameras off and the mics off, please, for the best connection possible. Thank you. Hello and welcome to everyone who is joining. We would like to ask all the participants to please keep your microphones on mute and your cameras off to ensure the best quality connection. Thank you. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the ones who just joined us. We would like to ask the participants to keep the cameras off and the microphones on mute to ensure the best quality of the connection. Thank you. Hello and welcome to the ones who just joined us. We would like to ask you to please mute your mic and keep the camera off so we have the best quality of the connection throughout this event. Thank you.
What is the reason Norway is getting new fighter jets, 52 of them, and new advanced submarines and surveillance aircraft? Why have we upgraded our combat vehicles and plan to invest more in air defense? What's the point of having someone practice again and again for the same task? Why must our best youth be sent off into the forest or into the mountains behind a screen? Why are we members of Nato, the world's largest defense alliance? What do we as a nation wish to achieve by all this? What do we want to happen? The answer is nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Ja.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Royal Norwegian Embassy and Yoga Atlantic to this open online seminar on NATO and the High North. My name is
Ja.
Carlijn Jans, member of the Advisory Council of the Young Atlantic, and I will be your moderator of today's discussion. Young Atlantic is the youth branch of the Atlantische Commissie and aims to raise awareness and involve students and young professionals in transatlantic security issues and relations. It's a platform for dialogue about the future of NATO for young people within the Netherlands, as well as in other NATO countries and Partnership for Peace countries. In this online seminar, we will be discussing changes that are now taking place in the High North, what this means for the region and NATO, and explore what Norway's and the Netherlands' policies are towards this region. We're being joined today by a distinguished group of speakers, dialing in from The Hague, Oslo, and Brussels. And I'm very pleased they can all join us via this online format. In the first half of this event, we will hear from our speakers, and in the second half, you as a participant will be able to ask questions. Before I introduce the first speaker, I will convey a few household rules under which we will conduct this event. I would like to remind you that this meeting is taking place under the Chatham House rule. This means that as a participant of this meeting, you are free to use information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speakers nor that of any other participants may be revealed. We would like to ask you to please keep yourself on mute and keep your camera off for the duration of this meeting in order to preserve the quality of the connection and so that everyone participating is able to see and hear all the speakers during the event without any disruption. Also, a small reminder that this event will be recorded and published online. Throughout this meeting, you can use the chat bar on the right to ask your questions. This function is available throughout the event, so we encourage you to post your questions at any time. The team behind the scenes will moderate the chat bar, and I will be picking up your questions in several Q&A moments. When you do ask a question, please state your name and affiliation with your question, and if possible, also indicate to who you're addressing this question to. In the interest of time, please stay short in your questions. Lastly, we will wrap up this event at 4 o'clock sharp. Now, we're here to discuss NATO and the High North. The High North and the Arctic are rapidly changing as it experiences climate change at a rate greater than twice the global average, and polar sea ice recedes and thins. The first ice-free Arctic summer under a high emissions scenario could occur as soon as 2042. These changes are resulting in increased human activity in the region as global actors exploit opportunities to exploit its natural resources and strategic geographic location. Norwegian Foreign Minister Søreide said in January of last year during Arctic Frontiers, and I quote, "The Arctic today is a region characterized by peace, stability, and international cooperation. This is no coincidence. It's a result of political choices. It's something we have worked hard to achieve, and it's something that we will work hard to maintain," end quote. As global power competition leads to increased presence and activities in the High North, it opens up a discussion on how allies can best continue to manage and maintain their vital security and other interests in the North Atlantic and Arctic. In November and December of 2020, Norway and the Netherlands both presented their future ambitions for the Arctic region in the form of a polar strategy and a white paper on the High North, respectively. In an interview last year, NATO Secretary General qualified the region as very important for NATO. If anything, it becomes more important, he said, and I quote, "The paradox is that you have this tradition of cooperation, trying to work together, lower tensions. But you also know that under the ice in the Arctic, you have some of the most dangerous weapons in the world," end quote. So today, we have a highly distinguished lineup of speakers to speak to this extremely topical issue. Our first speaker of today is Norway's ambassador to the Netherlands, Mr. Svensson. Before coming to the Netherlands, he was ambassador for Arctic and Antarctic affairs. Ambassador, we are very keen to hear from you, so I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon to everybody in the audience. I'm delighted to be able to spend this afternoon with you talking about a topic which is really close to my heart. As was mentioned, I spent 2 years serving as Norway's Arctic ambassador before arriving here in the Netherlands. And I've had the pleasure and the privilege of traveling extensively throughout the Arctic regions. Before we dive into the more hardcore security policy issues that we will discuss this afternoon, I would like to start by introducing a few more general Norwegian perspectives on the Arctic. And I'll start with the very obvious. Norway is an Arctic nation. If you look at the map, you will discover that large parts of Norway's territory on land and in the sea are located in the Arctic. This goes for all of northern Norway, mainland Norway. It goes for the archipelago of Svalbard, which is located halfway between the Norwegian mainland and the North Pole. And as I said, it goes for large ocean territories. This means that Norway has very obvious and clear national, strategic, and economic interests in the Arctic. It means also that for quite a lot of Norwegians, the Arctic is home, and the home tends to be a place that you would like to protect so that you can continue going on living there for many generations still to come. In other words, the Norwegian interests in the Arctic are large and they will continue to be so for the future. One thing that I would like to stress at the outset is that there are internationally quite a lot of myths about the Arctic. If you Google the Arctic, you will very quickly see that the pictures that come up tend to be pictures of uninhabited areas, ice, polar bears, areas that seem to be unavailable for human beings. But this is only part of the story. Parts of the Arctic are urban, parts of the Arctic are highly developed, parts of the Arctic are industrialized, and they are areas where a lot of people live. This aspect of the Arctic is very relevant for Norway because basically all of the northern areas of mainland Norway are inhabited. They are the home to more than 500,000 people. And this means, again, that for Norway, the issue of developing the Arctic will always be very high on the agenda. For Norway, it's very important that the Arctic remains an area where people continue living and where there is scope for economic activity and ways for people to secure their income and their lives. Another aspect I would like to touch on shortly is the aspect of climate change. Climate change is felt very acutely by people living in the Arctic. It's felt acutely by Norwegian fishermen who see that different fish stocks are migrating very quickly, and this may have consequences for their opportunities to continue their economic activities. It has very direct consequences for Sami reindeer herders in northern Norway when they see that the permafrost is melting. And of course, climate change has consequences for future economic activities in the oceans. It's no coincidence that a large country like China, for instance, is looking with great interest at the future prospects for economic activity in the Arctic when the ice starts to melt. Another myth that I would like to dispel very quickly is the myth that the Arctic has no governing structures. The reality is that basically all of the land territory in the Arctic falls under the jurisdiction of one of the 8 Arctic states. And most of the oceans that are located in the Arctic are also under the jurisdiction of one of the states. And to the extent that there are disputes over this, all the 8 Arctic nations agree that such disputes will be dealt with according to international law, according to the United Nations Law of the Seas. And this is one of the reasons why Norway continues to preach the gospel that the Arctic up until now remains a region of predictability, stability, and good international cooperation. The main international forum for cooperation in the Arctic is the Arctic Council. All 8 Arctic nations are members of this council, and a lot of other countries are observer states. The Netherlands is one of these active observers. The Arctic Council deals mainly with environmental issues, climate change issues, and issues of social and economic development. The Arctic Council does not deal with military issues or security policy issues. Does that mean that we lack a forum for discussion for such issues? No, not really. Security policy issues are discussed actively on a bilateral level between the Arctic states. It is also discussed in multilateral fora such as NATO. Norway is adamant that we all do our best to make sure that the Arctic remains an area of stability, predictability, and peace, and we shall do our utmost to make sure that this happens. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. There was quite a few myth busting going on, and I think that's very important. You've mentioned, Norway's approach to being a predictable and stable partner in the region, and that also means cooperating with your neighbors. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means in cooperation with your direct neighbors in the region, and what we could perhaps learn from that?
Norway has very active cooperation with all its Nordic neighbors. We also have very active cooperation with Russia, our big neighbor in the north. And I think our general experience with that is that when it comes to practical issues, such as environmental issues, fisheries management issues, border cooperation issues, cooperation continues more or less as usual. It's pragmatic and it's constructive, and it serves the interests of both nations. Where things have become more complicated over the last few years are global issues and security policy issues related to global developments. Norway is a very active and committed member of NATO. We are firmly rooted in the Western world and in the Western alliances. And this means that we will not refrain from speaking up when we feel that Russia does things that go against the international order and international law. So on these issues, I think, like most other Western countries, we've experienced more difficulties over the last few years. But as I said, when it comes to our neighborly relations, the picture, I think, is more nuanced and characterized by the fact that there are a lot of areas where we have joint and common interests.
Thank you, Ambassador, for this elaboration. Now we move on to our next speaker, and our next speaker is dialing in from Brussels, and we have the pleasure to welcome Ambassador Marisa Gerhardt, permanent representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to NATO. Mr. Ambassador, we are very keen to hear from you. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Carlijn. It's really wonderful to be here, and I would also like to thank Ambassador Svensson for taking this initiative and also for sharing all your knowledge on the Arctic. I'm learning a lot here myself at this moment in time. And also I would like to greet our audience, because I understand that we have many people listening in from the Netherlands and from Norway. And I think we go a long time back. We are long-time friends. It's Norway who is hosting our special forces since 1970, so that's over 50 years for their winter training. And I think there are many long-time friendships between our two countries. And one of them is my friendship with Øystein, the permanent representative of Norway here in Brussels. And I think he will be one of the speakers as well. Also very nice to reconnect with the young Atlantici, Carlijn. You're doing a great job, and I know that you have your NATO night, I think, in a few weeks' time. So I would like to ask the audience to be attentive and to also tune into that great event that you always organize. Maybe for today, the Arctic. Maybe you're wondering why the Netherlands, as we are not an Arctic country, but we go back a long way. You've heard probably of the Dutch explorer Willem Barents, or maybe you just know the sea that was named after him. It's up in the north. He sailed the seas in search of the Northeast Passage. It's quite some time ago. In 1596, his ship got trapped in the ice near Nova Zembla, and he had to spend a year there, I think. And I've heard, Ambassador, I don't know if you can confirm that or not, but that in your Varsø harbor up in the north, where all his expeditions started, that you still have a small statue there of Mr. Barents. So we're connected like that. And I think the story illustrates our interest. It goes back a long way. We are a seafaring nation with a keen commercial interest, but also scientifically, we've always been interested in the region. And my colleague Laurien Silvis will tell you a little bit more from that perspective. I will focus now on the NATO angle, because we work in NATO with a 360-degree threat assessment and perspective. So the High North is also on our radar. I would like to highlight three different elements from that perspective. First of all, maybe you're aware that in 2 years ago, in 2019, we celebrated the 70th anniversary of NATO, and we had a leaders meeting in London, and a decision was taken to initiate a reflection process. Because I mean, Darwin already mentioned it, it's not the strongest or the most intelligent species that will survive, but it's the one who adapts. And that's what NATO is doing for just another time. And so we are adapting to the new circumstances and to the new threats. And at the summit this year, probably somewhere in the summer, we don't have the date yet, the results of that process will be harvested. And the Secretary General, Stoltenberg, I think you all know him really well, in his press conference last Monday, he already gave a very interesting sneak preview of his thoughts and of his recommendations. And a few of his thoughts are very relevant, I think, for the discussion today. First of all, Stoltenberg, he underlined the importance of taking a global approach. So NATO taking a global approach, looking at global threats who have a local impact. Because what we see now nowadays is that there are many threats, although they come from far away, from the other side of the planet, they still have an impact here in our area. The second point that he put on the agenda is climate change. And as Ambassador Svensson, you already mentioned the enormous impact of climate change on that region. He put it on the agenda, and I think we will keep it there as one of his strategic points. The third one that I would like to mention is the update of the strategic concept. We have a concept, it's a public document, you can find it on the internet, and it gives direction to the alliance on a strategic level. It was lastly drawn up in 2010, and the world has significantly changed this last decade. For example, Russia became far more assertive than it was in that time, and the demise of the INF Treaty is one of the illustrations, I think. The rise of China, cyber, hybrid threats, but also climate change that turned the High North in an area of increased interest for global competition as well, are things that I think we have to include in our strategic concept. And also, I thought it's interesting, the reflection group that I mentioned just in the beginning, they They issued a report that you can also find on the internet. And one of their recommendations is also on the High North. They also recommend that NATO should have a more clear-eyed view of what's happening in that part of the world. Then my second point is Russia, also already mentioned, an Arctic nation. And if I Googled it correctly, with the longest Arctic sea border, great accessibility of the region is seen by Russia as a security threat in the eyes of their political and military leadership. And this results in increased Russian military activity. And the fact that Putin is upgrading the Russian Northern Fleet to a 5th military district in just January 2021 indicates the importance of the Arctic security for Russia. And this is something that we have to keep an eye on. We think this is really worrisome development. So we have to strengthen our deterrence and defense, but also we have to keep our channels for political and military dialogue with Russia open. This is our so-called double track approach, where deterrence and defense has to go hand in hand with dialogue, because we need these open lines of communication, and when and where it's possible, also confidence building measures are very important. And this, of course, is also very true and important for the High North. And I find it encouraging to read in the public documents that Russia also underlines the importance of peaceful and constructive cooperation in the region. Is that on? Yeah. We should use all relevant fora, I think, to engage and to look for constructive cooperation. Then my third point, but let me keep it brief because I think my time is running out, is I have to mention China. It has a clear growing presence in the Arctic, presenting itself as a near Arctic state. And also an important Arctic stakeholder. It's talking about the Polar Silk Road, it's having an Arctic white paper, and it's all growing signs of their interest. As is the case very often with China, it's very difficult to pinpoint their intentions, and it looks like they're mainly setting up economic and scientific activities, but we've seen before that economic activities can also have security implications, and therefore we think we need to monitor these activities closely and we have to remain vigilant. And of course China, it's also, I mean, it's as the EU said, it's a competitor, it's a systemic rival, but it's also a partner. We can only solve the climate crisis together with China, but we also have to be vigilant and look out for our case. Let me leave it there because time is running out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for this. These elaborate, these 3 points. Those are obviously very relevant for this region. The region has transformed by environmental and geopolitical change, and the 2030 report both addresses the issue of climate change, but also Russia and China. However, threat perceptions within the alliance sometimes differ. How could NATO focus on measures that will strengthen all-domain awareness and bridge this cleavage between climate change effects or issues and the threat coming from Russia and China in the future?
Well, we are all in a different part of the planet, so our geography is different. I'm not sure if our perception is so different. I mean, we are always talking about 360-degree threat perception. But of course, if you're neighboring Russia, it feels different than when you're far away. So I think we all agree that we have to look out for all these threats at the same time, and that indications and warnings are very important. We have to create this 24/7 situational awareness. We have the 5 domains. Space was added to it recently, and they all play a major role. Environment, like we mentioned, is something that we have to look out for. And so this cooperation in the High North is high on our agenda, and security and defense should be added to it. I understood that in the Arctic Council, you will not discuss security issues. So that is something I think where NATO can step in and can add something to what's happening in other fora. So I'm not so concerned about having different threat perceptions. We're just at a different part of the territory, and that therefore it feels a little bit different. But I think we all agree on what NATO should really look out for.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. I think some of these issues will return when we go for all panel discussion. Now we turn to a distinguished speaker, perhaps just down the hallway from Ambassador Gerhardt at NATO HQ. I'm not sure, but we welcome Norway's permanent representative to NATO, Ambassador Bø. You represent an Arctic state within NATO. How do you see the discussion on the High North within NATO from your perspective?
Thank you so much, and thank you, all of you, for making this happen. We have been speaking about this for a long time, and then COVID came along, and here we are. The only thing I miss is being able to go to The Hague with Marisa. And just a fun fact, Marisa, thank you for the kind words. We actually arrived at NATO at the very same day back in August 2018. So we actually go together here. Thank you also for the invitation to share some perspectives on NATO in the High North. Developments in this area is a main priority in Norwegian foreign and security policy. Security challenges in the north, including those stemming from our neighborhood with Russia and with the Northern Fleet, as has been spoken about, is nothing new to Norway. But currently, we do also see an increasing interest from allies for the Arctic. Overall, this is due both to its increasing geopolitical importance and to uncertainty as to what climate change and melting ice means for the strategic situation in these areas. And it is due to more concrete developments, such as the Russian military modernization and the increasingly assertive Russian military activity. As such, the Russian military capabilities in the High North do not only represent a challenge for Norway as a neighboring state, they also represent a strategic challenge to other allies and to the alliance as a whole. The impact of climate change has been mentioned, and that also leads to more general interest. I mentioned the potential strategic impact of the melting ice, but there are also other aspects such as new transportation routes, increased commercial activity, and possible new access to resources. And in this respect, as both Marisa and the ambassador in Hague pointed to, we see more interest from China and the Arctic, and many speak about increased cooperation between Russia and China. China describes itself as a near-Arctic state, and the Arctic is included in the Belt and Road Initiative. But so far, we have not seen much Chinese military activity in the north, and there is of course also a question as to whether Russia would be comfortable with and would facilitate such activity in their own backyard. We need to base ourselves on this issue on a facts-based approach, and we need to avoid speculation. And then we had heard the argument that also touched on that we lack a forum for allies to share views and discuss security challenges in the Arctic. In my view, we already have this forum, and that is NATO. And the ongoing reflection process, NATO 2030, aimed at strengthening our political consultations, only reinforces this. And whether we call it the Arctic or the High North, it is an integral part of the area covered by Article 6 of the Washington Treaty, and as such, it is NATO's responsibility. Since 2014, NATO has come a long way in adapting to the new realities in the North, which is already fully integrated into NATO's broader adaptation to strengthen our collective defense. For Norway, reviving NATO contingency planning to this end has been an important priority. It has been important to establish a common understanding on how the Russian bastion defense challenges not only Norway, but the whole alliance. This includes potential threats to transatlantic reinforcement, which is so crucial to our collective defense. And it has also been a priority for us to ensure an adapted NATO command structure. The creation of Joint Force Command Norfolk with a particular responsibility for the Atlantic and the High North is an essential element in this regard. And then finally, the new concept for the deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area fully acknowledges and integrates the strategic military challenges from Russia in the High North. To sum up, NATO has done a lot to address security challenges in the North. Still, a continued focus on the region is essential. And this includes investment in relevant capabilities, ensuring situational awareness and understanding, and seeking opportunities for calibrated and coordinated military activity. The High North is a challenging environment to operate. And it is important that allies know this area, but also that Russia understands that NATO's security guarantee is credible. We do see more presence from close allies such as the US and the UK, but also from the Netherlands, as also our ambassador in Hague mentioned, And as Marisa mentioned, who have been training in Norway for many, many years. And from a Norwegian perspective, this is highly appreciated and welcome. But at the same time, military activities need to ensure a calibrated and balanced measures of both deterrence and reassurance in order not to contribute to unwanted tension. Keeping a two-track approach of deterrence and dialogue is an important element of Norway's and NATO strategy towards Russia, including in the High North. I think I'll leave it at there for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bø. You mentioned that NATO is the right forum and right framework for allies to share views and discuss security challenges in the Arctic. Are there any discussions or modalities on how to involve relevant partners such as Finland and Sweden in such discussions as well?
Well, both Finland and Sweden are Arctic states, Arctic countries, and they have a clear interest in discussing these issues. And they also have a very close relationship to NATO, both politically and military, and they're, by many seen as our definitely closest partners. There are regular consultations between NATO and both his partner on several levels and in different formats. The Finnish foreign minister actually met with the North Atlantic Council this week, and his Swedish counterpart did the same a couple of months ago. The focus from these countries has traditionally been a bit on the Baltic Sea region, but we increasingly see that the dynamics in the High North is also on the agenda of them. And this is, of course, the right thing to do, as any attack or military incident that happens in the Baltic Sea region would also affect the High North and the other way around. So, and there is a lot of cooperation on the military side concerning on exercises and training. And there were regular consultations and coordination on the High North in the regional forums such as the Northern Group and NORDEFCO.
Thank you for this clarification, Mr. Ambassador. Now we turn back to The Hague, to Deputy Director International Affairs and Operations at the Dutch Ministry of Defense, Laurien Silvis. Ms. Silvis, the Netherlands published its polar strategy late last year. Could you tell us more about the Netherlands' approach towards the increased interest in the Arctic, as well as the need for cooperation, stability, and security? Is it a renewed approach from the Netherlands?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carlijn, and thank you to all the previous speakers and to everyone joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time out of what is, at least here in The Hague, a very sunny Friday afternoon to come and speak with us on this very important topic. I would like to use my time in this introduction to briefly focus on three aspects. Carlijn, you mentioned already, what is the importance of the Arctic for the Netherlands? Which Dutch policies are in place regarding this part of the world? And lastly, a brief focus on what the Ministry of Defence's policy is in particular. So the importance for the Netherlands, we keep a close eye, and we have for quite some time, on security developments in the Arctic. For us, it is important that the Arctic remains a region of low tension and high cooperation. I think that's the red thread running through my introduction here. This is reflected in our new polar strategy, covers the years 2021 to 2025, as you mentioned, which was published last month, and the Defense Vision 2035, our new white paper, which was published in October. In the polar strategy, our main observation is that Arctic security encompasses military, economic, and ecological developments, and that these are all very closely linked. Some of the previous speakers have also mentioned this. To make this more concrete, also mentioned by a few of you, melting of polar caps leads to new economic opportunities, the opening of new sea routes, and the possibility to access oil and gas reserves. And this in turn leads to more attention of regional and non-regional actors. A future deterioration of security in the Arctic can have profound consequences for the Netherlands. And here, something which is interesting to do also with geography, as was mentioned by a few of the previous speakers, our proximity towards the region. When I was doing some research and Googling on this, the Arctic is closer to us than, say, Lisbon or Bucharest. Closer than some of our NATO borders on the east and on the south, for that matter. Another reason is flow security. The Netherlands highly depends on the uninterrupted flow of goods, data, telecommunications in and out of our country for our prosperity and for our functioning. And so increased tension in the High North could, especially in future scenarios in which we see more economic activity in the region, disrupt these critical flows. And this is also why we have included a possible scenario on developments in the Arctic in our recently published defense vision. And as Ambassador Gerhardt already provided a broad overview of geopolitical developments in the region and NATO's response, I think together this leads to a situation in which we, together with our allies and partners in NATO and in the EU, we have to remain vigilant at all times. Now, what does that mean in terms of Dutch policy? The Arctic has traditionally been a region in which activities have been undertaken by the responsible Arctic states in a spirit of close cooperation, also mentioned by a few speakers already. For the Netherlands, it's really important that that stays this way. We have an interest in science, in sustainability, and international cooperation, not in a geopolitical arms race. The strategic goal of the Netherlands is therefore to keep the Arctic stable and a low-tension region where cooperation between countries is the main operating principle to solve differences. And even though the Netherlands is not an Arctic state, we work towards the goal of preserving the political stability of the region. And we do that through two means. The first is our active observership in the Arctic Council. The Netherlands has had this observer status since 1998, and we participate very actively in all the Council's many subcommittees. And as mentioned by a few speakers also, we believe that it is important that geopolitical and security issues are discussed on a bilateral basis and within NATO, as was mentioned by several speakers. And speaking of bilateral relations, the Netherlands is very active in its bilateral contacts with the Arctic states. We do this bilaterally, but we also do this in multilateral frameworks such as the Northern Group and the Joint Expeditionary Force, where we emphasize continuously the importance of cooperation and engagement. We are also a member of the Arctic Security Forces Roundtable, and our Dutch Arctic ambassador from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will continue to focus on building dialogue in the coming period with all of the Arctic states. Then lastly, very briefly, because I know I'm running out of time, the MOD's role. What is the role of the Ministry of Defense in this? As mentioned, we've included an Arctic scenario in our defense vision. And most interesting in that scenario, I think, is that our analysis is that a large-scale military conflict is not expected in the Arctic. I think we've mentioned that we don't foresee it in the next 15 years. However, the interplay between ecological, economic, and political military interests makes the Arctic a very delicate area. And I think this is clear to all of this from what we've heard today. And the threat in our scenario shows that the remote Arctic can indeed affect the security of the Netherlands and of Northern Europe. So we continue to closely monitor all the different developments in the region, including military developments, and believe this to be very important. And really what we're doing is remaining vigilant, and we remain prepared for various different scenarios. Lastly, we believe that deep cooperation with all the relevant actors is the best way to effectively manage upcoming challenges in the High North in the foreseeable future. I'd like to leave it at that. Thank you, Carlijn.
Thank you, Mr. Levis. It's a very elaborate overview of the Dutch approach towards the High North and Arctic. And you mentioned the commitment to cooperation and keep it a low tension area, but there's also an increased interest in the region in the coming years. And you briefly mentioned the defense vision towards 2035, so looking ahead. Should we expect a greater, perhaps non-permanent presence of Dutch forces in the region? I mean, there's already a lot of cooperation with Norway on this, but what does it actually mean for the military in this sense? And what does that mean for having certain capabilities?
Thanks, Carlijn. Yeah, that's a good question. As has been mentioned, we have a very long tradition of working together and training in Norway, but also many of the other Arctic countries. But with Norway in particular, it has been a very close relationship, and we continue to have that. Really, I think there are no immediate plans, but what I do think is very telling is the fact that we have now included, as I mentioned, this Arctic scenario in our vision. So really, it does mean that from the 360 approach, which was also mentioned, we see that it's maybe an area of the world that previously has not been so much in the spotlight in the Netherlands, but we continue to monitor it very closely from the MOD perspective. Yeah, that's really all I can say about that, I think, in this forum and in this particular format, but we keep a close eye on developments in the Arctic. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for this elaboration. Policy Director Svein Efjestad of the Norwegian MOD could unfortunately not be with us today, but fortunately, Deputy Director Colonel Askvik is joining us from Oslo, excuse me. Colonel Askvik currently serves in the Department for Security Policy and Operations in the Norwegian Ministry of Defense. He's Deputy Director in the section responsible for security policy analysis, security and defense policy for Russia, China, and the High North. Colonel Askvik has a background as an Air Force officer. He's a pilot and flew a P-3 Orion for 10 years in the Barents Sea. But before we go to Colonel Askvik, we will watch a video message from Policy Director Svein Efjestad.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to speak on the developments in the High North. From the Norwegian Ministry of Defense, we enjoyed a long and most fruitful cooperation with colleagues in The Hague, and we greatly appreciate the important contribution of Dutch forces from all services in our country for decades and their continued participation today. I think there are three important factors which can explain the current developments in the High North. First, climate change. The rise in temperature in the north is much stronger than what we can observe elsewhere. Already about 5 degrees centigrade at Svalbard. It has many serious consequences for the environment, but it also opens up large areas for all kinds of activity like shipping, fisheries, tourism, and military operations. There is unfortunately every reason to believe that this development will continue and accelerate. Secondly, political tension between Russia and the West have increased and broadened over the last 10-15 years. In the US defense strategy from 2018, focus has shifted away from war against terrorism to deterrence and defense to counter China and Russia. NATO's policy is centered on maintaining deterrence and credible defense vis-à-vis Russia. The Arctic is a very important basing area for Russian armed forces, and also an area from which Russia can deploy offensive forces towards the West. Lastly, the rapidly changing technological developments are changing the nature of military planning and operations also in the Arctic. The increasing use of unmanned autonomous weapon systems will have implications for stability in the High North. The High North has been characterized by low tension and stability. We now witness that Russia is modernizing its bases in the Arctic and that they expand their military activity there. Still, there are many factors which contribute to stability and cooperation in the Arctic. We cooperate very well with the Russian Coast Guard and their border guards. We maintain direct telephone lines with the Northern Fleet and Russian National Crisis Management Organization in Moscow. and we still have a regular dialogue with the Russian Minister of Defense. Furthermore, we consult with the Russian General Staff concerning incidents at sea based on a bilateral agreement. There are concerns that the situation in the High North will be more tense and that the Arctic in general could be seen as a forward defense area for both Russia and NATO. From the Norwegian point of view, we want to maintain credible deterrence and defense based on NATO's collective efforts, but at the same time contribute to stability and confidence building in the North. Thank you.
We now turn to Colonel Askvik. Mr. Efjestad spoke about cooperation, but also concerns regarding to Russia. What are the consequences for the Arctic when looking at Russian military activities, its development, and the Russian concept of strategic deterrence, both military and non-military means? Could you perhaps elaborate on this?
Thank you very much. That's an excellent question. First, let me extend my sincere thanks to the organizers for putting together this event, and also in particular to Caroline for guiding us through. Also the previous speakers for their insightful contributions. And I must say it's a pleasure to see so many participants join for this topic of strategic importance on a Friday afternoon. Now, leading into my answer, Ambassador Gerhardt touched on the creation of the 5th Military District, the Joint Strategic Command Northern Fleet. Their most important mission is to contribute with nuclear weapons to a strategic deterrence. And that's a mission of strategic importance for them. Now, in order to conduct that mission, they need to be able to protect both the capabilities, the bases, and the infrastructure. And to do that, they have layers of defensive capabilities defending these closer base areas where their ambition is sea control, to control the local area. In addition to controlling the local area, the Joint Strategic Command Northern Fleet is the only fleet that can project force into the Atlantic. And so in addition to controlling the local area, sea denial or denial operations south into a line between Greenland, the UK, and Iceland is also a part of that. In addition to that, as Ambassador Bø mentioned, force projection into the Atlantic to conduct, disturb, and hinder the sea lines of communication between the US and NATO is a strategic mission for them. So what we've seen the last, particularly since 2014, what we have seen is more Russian military activity further south and further west than we have seen previously. And we also see allied military activity further north. And so I think I'll close with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel, for this insight into this topic. I would like to bring in the previous speakers, Ambassador Bø and Gerhardt, and Deputy Director Colonel Askvik, but also Laurin Silvis, for a joint discussion as a panel. Before I ask you a question, I would like to remind the people who are tuning in that this is the moment to start asking questions, which we will be picked up in the chat bar. And so I will then throw them at the panel. We have talked a lot about different aspects of the High North as a region, as well as what NATO's and your government's approaches to manage and maintain vital security in the region are. We talked a lot about Russia as well, but actually one of the questions that already came in is a question about China. What are your predictions about Chinese influence in the Arctic and possible military presence, and what this actually means for NATO, but also its Arctic member states? Who would like to elaborate on this one? Who would like to take the floor? Ambassador Bö.
Well, I can start since I also mentioned it, and maybe Örjan could fill in. What I pointed to was that so far, firstly, Russia has a bit more than 50% of the circumpolar areas and have clear interest and have their own kind of strategic interest in the Arctic. And there are many people. Every time I visit places to speak, I always get a question about cooperation between Russia and China, and also about what China is up to. It's a clear interest in the Arctic from China, and we will see what it leads to. We know that the Russians are interested in cooperating with them, in particular to get some of the financial means they have available. But we're not that sure when we have not seen much military activity yet, and we actually, our analysis so far has been that we're not sure that Russia would facilitate military activity by the Chinese in their own backyard. And of course, there is then an open question, given the combination of financial interests and the pressure and China's influence growing. Can they withstand that in the long term? I don't know, Örjan, whether you could kind of complement that.
I could. Ambassador Bö is spot on. I think the most important thing for Russia is to achieve national control in the area because of the strategic importance for their contribution to nuclear deterrence. At the same time, they lack the resources to develop the region as they would want to. And China has a lot of resources. And so there's an ambiguity in the Russian relationship to Chinese support. They would like the monetary support, but they would not want to have anyone impede on their ability to contain national control. I also agree with Ambassador Bö that we have not seen Chinese military activity in the north. Now, we have seen the Sea Dragon on several missions to the north with researchers, and we should not be naive. It's not a military vessel, but I think the contact back to the Communist Party and to the PLA is close. At the same time, it's not a military vessel, and we don't see any military activity. So far, Chinese ambitions have been to extend into the other areas that they can, research, finance with the Russians, but not military. Also, it's quite a while, it's quite a distance for the Chinese to transit if they wanted to have Chinese military activity, and we should see that in relationship to what they could achieve militarily. Nonetheless, potential cooperation between China and Russia is something that we have to consider. We have to follow it closely. A closer relationship between them would definitely challenge security at the global stage. And so we need to monitor it and follow it closely. But so far, our main assessment is that Russia is ambivalent. Thank you.
Any Ms. Silvis or Ambassador Gerhardt, you want to come in on this, or shall we move to a next question?
Okay, well, maybe just from my side.
Yeah, sure.
Quick, Carlijn, because you can see that we're very like-minded countries, because I would have raised the same points, that you can see that they work together, but they have also different interests. You can see that there's no military presence at this moment in time, but we have to be vigilant. For commercial reasons, I think it's very interesting for China, also as a sea route. Scientific research as well. And just the fact that they see themselves as a near Arctic state, I think is a case in point to keep an eye on what's happening. So those are, I think, also the points that were raised by our Norwegian colleagues. So very, very aligned.
Great, thank you. We have quite a few questions coming in from the audience. I would like to pick some of those up. Eva van Schijndel, who's a data scientist at the Norwegian police, asks, could any of the speakers give some example of cooperation topics? Which of those are high priority at the moment? Examples of border control, trade, looking into that direction. I think it's, if you do this, then I can see who would like to come in. Anyone who would like to comment on this? Ambassador Beu, you're muted.
I don't know whether Boyd or I should start. On the kind of security side, we have a relationship with the Russian which is difficult for the time being. We have in NATO, there is not much action going on in the NATO-Russia Council due to lack of interest from Russia. But we do have, and I mean, Örjan could also say a bit about this. We do have an hotline between the Joint Operational Headquarters of Norway and the Northern Fleet, and there is a hotline between SACEUR, the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, and the Russian Chief of Defense. We do cooperate on border control. We do cooperate on search and rescue. And my kind of prime example has always been that Norway has been since 1949 both a neighbor of Russia and a member of NATO. And we have been able to balance that with maintaining a good relationship with the Soviet Union. And also, I will still claim Russia, even though we shout a bit at each other from time to time. And one of the really kind of good examples to my mind is the way we have managed to maintain the fishery stocks in the north through the joint Norwegian-Russian Fisheries Commission, which is really kind of a win-win situation for both countries, and shows that if there are issues that we can actually gain from, we can cooperate.
Thank you. Ms. Silvers? Yes.
Thanks. Maybe just to clarify, was the question on cooperation between the Netherlands and Norway, or I'm not quite sure, because I could speak on that for quite some time, but just to make sure that I answer Eva's question.
Yeah, I think it was meant to be more broadly, so with partners in the region, but also with on a bilateral cooperation between the Netherlands and Norway.
Okay, yes. So I can elaborate a little bit on that. I think, and this also has a little bit to do with the fact that I mentioned that there are various different compositions in which we have discussions with countries in the region. So on a bilateral basis, this happens quite a lot. Obviously, today it makes sense to highlight the excellent cooperation on a wide variety of topics with Norway. But maybe a concrete example of also something that is discussed very regularly in fora such as the Northern Group or the Joint Expeditionary Force. It definitely has a lot to do with hybrid threats and how we deal with those. I would say that if looking at the last few years, a topic that is continuously on the agenda, both in bilateral talks, but also in those fora, and definitely also at NATO. This is something that we discuss and cooperate with the countries in the region. And also in terms of, I mentioned that in terms of also just situational awareness. This was mentioned, I think, also by quite a few speakers. And there's elaborate cooperation between intelligence services and also just on a policy level. I would say that speaking for me personally, some of the colleagues that I speak to the most are the colleagues that have links in the Arctic or are indeed Arctic states. So they're very close to our hearts. And I think Ambassador Gerhardt also mentioned it. You know, there are very few, it always makes for very pleasant meetings because there are very few topics that we don't actually see eye to eye on. So a lot of cooperation, but if I had to pick one thing that has definitely stood out over the last couple of years, it would be how to counter hybrid threats. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurien. We received a question from Arjan Vermeer, and actually I would like to pose this question both ways. His question is, what are the Norwegian expectations of the EU and the Netherlands in particular to keep the High North stable? But maybe also the other way around is, what are the expectations of the Netherlands from Norway in this regard? Yes, Ambassador Svensson.
Thank you very much. I think one thing that is very important from Norway's perspective when it comes to the future of the Arctic is to make sure that we are well informed. One thing I did a lot when I was Arctic ambassador was to travel around to different European countries and simply inform colleagues and politicians about the state of affairs in the Arctic. Norway spends a lot of resources on research in the Arctic in all sorts of different fields. The Netherlands has a very good Arctic research center in Groningen that I've been in touch with, and I think one thing that is highly important for us is that the Arctic remains high on the agenda for the European Union. That they keep, as I said, informed about what the state of affairs is.
Thank you, Ambassador. Anyone else who wants to come in on this? No? Okay. There's a question from Ingrid Handeland, who is from the Royal Norwegian Naval Academy. And she asks, because Ambassador Bø mentioned this before, as NATO being the best forum to discuss security in the Arctic, but she asks how to address the issue with Russia, especially in times where China is showing larger interest in the Arctic. And what are the views regarding this? Yes, Ambassador.
Yeah, we touched on this already.
Yeah.
I might have misunderstood the last question, but that was part of it. I mean,
I think the question is, sorry,
yeah.
I think also the question relates to how to also engage with China on this topic. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Well, so far, you know, we are, firstly with Russia, as I mentioned, the climate to engage with them in the NRC is not very good right now, the NATO-Russia Council in NATO. But there is, of course, a potential of using the NATO-Russia Council as part of a broader dialogue on military posture, information on exercises and openness and so on. Is transparency in connection with concrete military activities is highly important in order to avoid surprises. There is also, Ambassador Svensson board mentioned the Arctic Council, and he also mentioned that security issues are not discussed in the Arctic Council. And I believe that that is how it should be, because the Arctic Council, which now soon has a Russian chairmanship, is one of the fora where we actually can speak to the Russians. And I think we need to have fora where we can discuss with Russians on things that is not affecting security. So I think that is the right thing to do. And how we to keep security issues out of the Arctic Council, and how we engage with China on this. How should I put it? Some others might compliment me, but so far there has not been that much to engage with China. China is present on Svalbard with a research platform, as many others, and they are present with the icebreaker, as also Ørjan mentioned. But so far there hasn't been very much, kind of, as not as I'm aware of, with bilateral or engagement with China on the security issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think there was also a question from the audience on cooperation within NATO and focus towards the High North or the North Atlantic. And last year, NATO's newest Joint Force Command was established in Norfolk, responsible for the North Atlantic and the High North. It has a symbolic and operational meaning. What has changed that NATO needs a new command, and what are the implications for the North Atlantic security and collective defense in this area? I think maybe some of the speakers could elaborate on this new command in the area that looks specifically to this region. Anyone want to comment on this one?
I don't know, Jan, whether you might want to come in on that, or
I can give it a try. I think one of the realizations the last 5 to 10 years is that the Russian modernization since 2008, they have now completed a 10-year state armament program. And the implications of that we are already starting to see. Now, on top of the completed 10-year state armament program, they are planning to finance a new 10-year state armament program, and the implications of that has to be met at the strategic level. One of the challenges emanating from the Northern Fleet is the employment of submarines into the Atlantic. And that creates a strategic challenge to maintain the sea lines of communication between the US and Europe and NATO open. And that is something that requires both organizational focus, staffing, capabilities. And so the new command in Norfolk is a welcome contribution to the organization seen from Norway. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel. Ambassador Gerhardt.
Yes, well, actually, I have someone with me here in the room who is, we are a joint delegation here. So we have the diplomatic and the military part are integrated in our delegation. And he knows a lot about this subject. And I think it can be interesting just to give him the floor, if you allow me, for him to answer this question, because it's mainly from the military perspective, I think, that we should add a few elements. So is that okay, Carlijn?
Yes, of course. Yes, I think it would be very interesting. Hello.
Yes, good.
His name is Niels Woutstra.
Hello, Niels Woutstra.
I'm the deputy military representative to NATO of the Netherlands, and indeed we do have a integrated delegation here in the headquarters. So not many NATO delegations which are as integrated as we are, so that's a very good thing. So we decided to be here this afternoon together. Indeed, with regard to Joint Force Command Norfolk, it's not like standing up again the pre-Allied Command Atlantic, but it's a sort of new way to be able to reinforce and to enable indeed the western and the northern part of the AOR of Secure. So I think it's been necessary since 2014, where we had the occupation of Crimea, that we need again to stress the collective defense. We have the shift from crisis management to collective defense, and it's absolutely necessary to be able to reinforce and to enable Western and Northern Europe. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much for adding this on. I think it's very valuable. We received a question from Marian Simakovic, and she asks, could the Arctic be included in the Zapat 2021 military exercises scenario? I don't know if any of the speakers could speak to this issue. I believe the Zapat exercises are the Russian exercises in the area.
I can address that initially. Now, the Zapat exercise, of course, is the Western, the Russia. Every year they circle their strategic exercises, and every fourth year they have an exercise in the strategic Western direction. And the last time they had that in 4 years ago, they did have a component to the north. And so we should not be surprised if we see another Zapat exercise, primarily in the western direction, but also with a northern component to it. Now, how large, how complex is hard to predict, but we have seen much higher military activity in the north, also emanating from the north towards the south and further west than we have seen previously. So I think we could see a northern component to Zapat. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who wants to come in on this question? No? Let me see. There's a question from the British Defence Attaché in the Netherlands, and he asked, assuming the Arctic Council remains a forum for only Arctic countries, how best do you address the interests of the near Arctic neighbors and other countries? And I guess this is again a question about the government, the governance structure. Could anyone elaborate on this one?
Yes, I'll be happy to talk to that, since I represented Norway on the Arctic Council for 2 years. The organization of the Arctic Council is such that the 8 Arctic nations are formal members of the Council. The US, Canada, the 5 Nordic countries, and Russia. In addition to that, quite a large number of countries are observer countries. That means that they take part in most of the meetings of the Council, and they observe. And as observers, they can from time to time bring in their own questions or concerns. So in that sense, I think the role of non-Arctic countries is actually fairly well looked after, the way that the organizational format works at the moment. The UK, for instance, takes active part in the Arctic Council as an observer state. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yes, Ms. Silvis.
Thank you. Maybe just to elaborate on that, as one of the observers, I think one of the interesting aspects here is that we really see a sort of compound effect. We have all of the discussions on the Council. At the same time, I mentioned a few times, we have the various different bilateral contacts that we have. Then we have the, I think some of them are sometimes referred to as the clubs within the club. So the Northern Group, Joint Expeditionary Force, etc. And really what we are trying to do as the Netherlands is we're trying to make sure that all of those different discussions and all of those different fora and relationships all amplify each other and create really this compound effect of having different discussions and different fora to bring topics really forward. So one of the challenges we have had is to make sure that that happens, so that the discussions that we have really strengthen the topics that we're discussing today as well. And so far, so good. We've really been succeeding in that, and I think you can see that in the attention for the Arctic and the High North. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for a few more questions, so please keep them coming. We have a question from Jan Solstad. It's again a question about cooperation. He asks, cross-border cooperation in the north is the one important balancing side. That's generally agreed. The other side is the show of force seen from major states. It might be counterproductive if the regional cooperation side is seen as a coordinated action for the show of force side. Should the regions promote more self-confidence on own interests and at the same time show more Western traditional democratic systems different from the Eastern side? So I don't know if anyone can say perhaps something about also the confidence building measures in the region. But I think the question is more about that balancing act between cooperating but also deterring, having a dialogue, but also having deterring effects of military presence in the region. Ambassador Gerhardt, you're on mute.
Yeah, we were a bit puzzled about the question, but I also took it. I could see that you were a bit puzzled too. But if I take it from the angle of the values that bind us, I was still also a bit thinking of the question on the EU that was asked before, which brings us back to the same issue, I think, because I feel that in this day and age of global competition, I think the values that bind us are very important. And so I think EU and NATO should work closely together, because together we're so much stronger. If you look at the Arctic, we have certain allies, Arctic allies, who are not in the EU, like Norway, like Canada, like Iceland, like the US. But there are also very important Arctic states who are a member of the EU, and you mentioned them yourself, Finland and Sweden. So I feel as we have the same values, as we share the same security objectives, as 21 countries are member of both organizations, I think we should really join hands and join. And then I would be really interested also to hear the perspective from Norway, being very closely connected to the EU but still not being a member, how you see that cooperation. And I don't know if we're still answering the question on that value issue. Otherwise, I think the person who was asking the question should correct us maybe and make it a little bit more precise.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Svensson, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I think I'll give this a go from another angle. I said initially in my first introduction that for a lot of Norwegians, the Arctic is home. And that goes also for quite a lot of Russians, for Americans who live in Alaska, for Canadians who live in the Northern Territories. And from that perspective, we have a very good and constructive dialogue in the Arctic Council, because we are talking about areas where we have the same interests. It's in the interests of Russia, Norway, Canada, the US, for instance, to mitigate climate change and to make sure that we can deal with climate change in a way that allows people to keep living in the Arctic and having that as a home. We also have very good discussions in the Arctic Council about questions of the social and economic developments and the role of indigenous peoples who live all the way across the Arctic. So in that sense, the Arctic Council is an example of an area where we actually have a constructive, good dialogue. On the values issues, I share Marisa's comments very much. There is no doubt that there is a gap when it comes to issues of basic values, democracy, human rights, and so on between Russia and Western countries. And that's also an important part of the general dialogue. And we have to kind of keep things separate, I think, in this regard.
Ambassador Gerhardt, you wanted to come? Sorry, I think you're still on mute. You wanted to comment on this? No? Anyone else who wanted to respond to this question? Then I move on to next question, who comes from Elizabeth, and she asked, the Russian Federation recently mentioned they want to resume meetings with all Northern Chiefs of Defense to build trust and security in the region. This question came from Liz Terkuylen from the Dutch Ministry of Affairs, so I'm assuming this is directed towards the Norwegian speakers.
I'm not familiar with that, Örjan. I don't know whether you have some.
I have heard about it. I have not seen any analysis or discussion about it, but I'm certain that if that is a formal request, it will be addressed and discussed and decided at the appropriate political level.
Yes, Ambassador.
Går or me?
Sorry, you. Yes.
Yeah. No, I just also wanted to. I mean, since the illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014, all allied countries have have suspended the military cooperation with Russia. So this is such a request would also have to be seen in the light of that. But I'm not very familiar with that request.
Okay, thank you.
If I may just add briefly, because I know that there have been these sorts of requests on several occasions after Crimea, and as Ambassador Bø said, I mean, there is a very principal important decision that has been made here, not only in Norway but also in other NATO allied countries, that we do not engage in that kind of dialogue as long as these breaches of international law continued. But there have been both formal and informal advances made from the Russian side, where they have requested more of this type of dialogue.
Thank you, Ambassador. We're nearing the end of this discussion, and a question came in from Anders Løkse, and I would actually also like to use this question as an opportunity for you to give a closing remark. And his question is, what could be the potential conflicts in the near future? So what do you think is the biggest risk in the near future for the region? And after that, we will close up this event. What is the biggest risk to this region?
This is a very big question, a very big issue. I will again. I'll go at this at the angle of a more kind of a generalist view. Climate change is a very pressing issue for the Arctic, with a lot of consequences. It may have consequences for security policy and for defense cooperation, but above all, it has some serious consequences for people who live and breathe in the Arctic. And I think that is, from a global point of view, it's the most important issue that we're faced with at the moment.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Bø, would you like to go next for a final or closing thought on NATO in that?
This question or a final?
Yeah, or also more generally, it's like.
Yeah, no,
how do you see
on this question,
yeah.
I think also have to remember that, I mean, Ambassador Svensson spoke about the interest in the discussion with Russia and others in the Arctic Council. We have to remember that the climate change is also of immense consequence for Russia, because it's not only ice is melting, but the permafrost is disappearing. And with all the activity, as Bård said, you know, we have people living in these areas. And if I wanted to give one final comment, it's kind of a bit the same that I ended with. We need to have, and some of the people who asked questions touched on this, we need to have a good balance between defense and deterrence and reassurance. And it's always difficult to say what exactly is that balance. We are, as I said, we are pleased to see allied activity. We also do a lot of our own. They have in the Baltic something they call the enhanced forward presence. So we do actually 24/7 enhanced forward presence in the northern area with our own forces, and it's important that we find that we don't have military activities that actually raises tension. And we also have to remember that when the Netherlands and the US and the UK go home, we are still there with our people living there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bø. Any final thoughts or comments from Ambassador Gerhardt?
Yes, okay. Yes, well, I very much agree with what the other two speakers just said, and maybe to say to my own words, in this era of global competition, climate change is opening up a new theater, and so that's always very risky because there are mineral resources. Also, there's a pathway that's open now, so freedom of navigation. What will the Russians do? Will they impede this freedom of navigations or not? Will there be a run for mineral resources? I mean, it's always a risky time, and for many reasons, not only because it's opening up a new theater, but also because climate change is actually really a big threat, I think, for our planet. So instead of competition, we should look for a way of cooperating and talking to one another. And that brings me to the points that were made by Ambassador Bö, that we have to look for that dialogue. And you need deterrence to talk from a position of strength, but we absolutely have to look for that dialogue.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ms. Silvis or Colonel Asvik, any final comments?
Sure, thank you very much. And also to echo previous speakers, again, it's a great pleasure to be in a forum where everyone agrees with each other so much. So this is always very good. And I think what makes this part of the world particularly interesting, and many of us have touched on it today, is that it's really a region where perhaps like very few others in the world, where security, economics, and ecological developments intertwine in such a, let's say, dramatic way. And I think we also are just seeing the beginning of those developments. So I think the focus of it, a focus on this region, at least in Dutch policy and Dutch politics, is something that is very very relevant and very topical and very important today, and will continue to be important towards the future. And very much in line with Ambassador Gerhardt, I think the most important thing that we can do is to keep communicating. We have to keep talking to each other, and we have to keep talking also to perhaps some of the parties that were mentioned here today that may not initially seem to be on the same course as we are. So I think that is crucial moving forward. And I think sometimes the amount of different fora and committees and meetings and documents can be a bit dazzling, a little bit overwhelming, but I think it's precisely what this important part of the world needs, is more communication, more cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Silvis. Colonel Asvik, final thought?
It's hard to come up with new points after four such elaborate speakers have gone before me. But I will stress, for Norway, it's a matter of being home. This is where we live. And I will underline the climate change as the main driver. It is happening fast. It is happening now. At Svalbard, we have seen 5 degrees of change in the last decades, and it's happening at twice the rate as in the rest of the world. And so it's rapidly changing our environment, and this will affect all of us, but at double the rate in the north. In addition to climate change, it is a region opening up, and because of great power rivalry, it is also a region attracting attention for strategic reasons other than climate change in the security domain, and those will have to be watched carefully in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Asvik. With this, I would like to conclude this online discussion. I would like to thank the speakers, Ambassadors Svensson, Gerhardt, and Bö, and Svein Esvestad, Laurien Silvis, and Colonel Asvik for this very stimulating discussion, as well as the teams of the Royal Norwegian Embassy and Young Atlantic doing all the work behind the scenes. And lastly, I would like to thank you all for following and participating and asking so many questions. But before I let you go, I would like to invite you to, on behalf of the Young Atlantic, to 2 of their next events, one which is on European military space on March 9th, and their flagship event, NATO Night, on April 9th. If you go to their website, you will find more information and you have the opportunity to register. For now, thank you very much and have a lovely weekend.
Caroline, can you still hear me? I just want